中原跳水时间8点。
No worries. This is Detention. It's a side-scrolling point-and-click adventure / horror game set in 1960s Taiwan during the White Terror period. Released in 2017, this is the first game created by Red Candle Studio. They have another game they released in 2019, but it's gone. It's gone. I don't know where it is. Anyway, it had a really high review score on Steam, and it was on sale for less than $10, so I picked it up thinking it was either going to be really good or really overrated. Unluckily for you, it turns out I really enjoyed this game, and I made this crappy video about it. Enjoy! Let's get to the setting. I mentioned the White Terror period before, so what is the White Terror period? I'm going to have to put a timer on here, just because I have a bad habit of rambling, not making sense, and boring people when it comes to talking about history. Alright, so ever since the First Opium War, China had been in a constant state of decline and civil unrest. With the collapse of the Qing dynasty came a massive power vacuum. Eventually two main factions formed. The Republic of China led by the
Kuomintang.
Yeah, pretty close. And the Communists led by Mao Zedong. These two groups fought viciously against each other. Briefly teamed up to fight the Japanese in World War II, and they went right back to beating the snot out of each other. And by 1949, the Communists had pretty much won on the mainland. The Republic of China's forces retreated to the island of Taiwan with the full intention of continuing the war. They declared martial law soon after, marking the beginning of the White Terror period. This lasted until 1987. This era was characterized by an intense red fear and brutal repression of free speech. Around 140,000 Taiwanese were arbitrarily imprisoned during this time, and between 3,000 to 4,000 were executed for any kind of crime that could be remotely perceived as unpatriotic or communist in nature. I'd never heard of the White Terror period before playing Detention, and I really love when games and other media make you curious enough to go and learn more about these sorts of things on your own. So you play as a high school student named Wei sometime during the 1960s. The point of view you're presented with is of a generation that has only ever known this big brother style of rule. The concepts of free speech and a multi-party political system are foreign concepts that you're not even allowed to read about. At the start of the game, your teacher Miss Yin is giving a lecture at the front of the class, and the school's commissar can be seen approaching the classroom. He asks Miss Yin a few questions, and it seems pretty tense. Then your character falls asleep. Okay, so you wake up and everyone's gone. So you read a note that's been left on the desk behind you. Apparently Miss Yin has been gone for weeks, and also a typhoon has appeared out of nowhere. So what's going on here? Well, this is one of those games that has a lot of weird stuff going on. A lot of it is abstract or symbolic or something like that. You know, standard horror game stuff. The basic objective though, throughout the whole game, is just to escape the school you're trapped in. That's a pretty relatable goal. School was hell for me too. As you look around, you come across a girl named Ray, who was sleeping in the assembly hall for some reason. You decide to head home together, but Sure. With no way to get home besides the bridge, Wei and Ray hold up at the school to wait out the typhoon in Wei's classroom. Wei and Ray chat for a bit and get to know each other. After which, Wei decides to go looking for a telephone. But he gets Thanos snapped, leaving Ray all alone. As an aside, something you should know about this game is that it's not in its native language. It was made in Taiwan, but for what it's worth, the translation is pretty spot on. There's a neat interview I came across where one of the developers explains the crazy amount of work they put into the English translation. Not just like the dialogue and stuff, but the world design and references to Taiwanese mythology too. They put a lot of effort into making it understandable to an English-speaking audience, without losing too much of the cultural fidelity. And it really paid off. Considering that a pretty small team made this, it's really impressive. So how does this game run? Well, it was developed on the Unity engine. That engine's got a pretty bad reputation. And if you combine that with words like indie and horror, it's enough to set off warning bells in your head. However, for every terrible Unity engine game there is out there, there are a bunch that run perfectly fine. And Detention is one of these games. I had no problem running this game on my PS4 or my PC. I did have a few moments near the start where there was a noticeable stutter in the frame rate, but that's because I was running OBS in the background, and my computer is a potato. The art style of the game is pretty unique. The characters kind of look like 2D cutouts placed on a static background painting. Think Angela Anaconda meets The Grudge. It works really well, and the way shadows and lighting react with the character models make it seem like you're moving through the world rather than over the top of it. I like it a lot. The colours are all quite drab, dark, depressing, but the visuals match what is going on in the story. There are actually a couple of moments when something good seems to be happening to the main character and the colour palette drastically shifts, but they become even more disturbing than they originally were when that good thing goes sour. As you move around and get a look at the school, it's noticeably beat up. There are cracks in the wall, it's all a bit dirty. All of the equipment and architecture you see is very 1960s utilitarian in style. Kind of like an East Asian Springfield elementary. It's also getting pretty late, and the idea of being stuck in a rundown old school at night time works really well for a horror game. Schools were always one of those places that it felt like you shouldn't be there when it's nighttime. As the story progresses, the visuals become a bit more surreal and hellish, and the same goes for the puzzles. There are some pretty messed up visuals in this game. A fair amount of the more surreal aspects, including the enemies, are inspired by Taiwanese folklore and mythology. I can't go into too much detail on specifics without spoiling things, but the game does a good job of cluing you in on what you need to know when you need to know it, so you don't feel too lost in regards to the story. There's no voice dialogue in the game or voice lines at all. I'm fine with that, by the way. Voice acting probably wouldn't have improved the game that much, and if it was done poorly it would have made it a lot worse. As it is, the amount of reading you have to do is fairly minimal. At the very least, you're not having to read paragraph after paragraph. The devs keep it fairly short, snappy, and interesting, unlike this video. The lack of a human voice actually helps to make you feel alone in the school. Besides the monsters you occasionally run into, you're totally isolated. It's quiet, and the only noise you can hear in certain parts are your own footsteps. That's because the music is fairly subdued for the most part. It's hard to tell where the ambient sound stops and the music begins. What you can hear is pretty bizarre though. It's almost unnoticeable for the most part, and I couldn't quite put my finger on what I was actually listening to. So I had to look it up. The composer Wei Fan Chang fused electronic and lo-fi music together, along with traditional Asian instruments. Neat, so that's what you're listening to. Looking it up didn't actually help me understand it that much more, so I looked up what lo-fi meant. So lo-fi is short for low fidelity. That just means the audio is low quality, but in a way that sounds kind of nice. Oh yeah, kind of like an old record player or vaporwave. In this case it's run through a horror filter, and there might be a waterphone involved. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. I like the music and it suits the setting really well. The music really ramps up in some places though, especially when something is happening or about to happen. It's good for tension. Not only that, but it helps to key you in on new environmental dangers. Something's different. A couple of times the music was incorporated with what was going on in the scene. The sound of people arguing, the sound of the typhoon outside, it's even a key mechanic in one of the puzzles. Apparently these songs were banned at the time. You could go to jail for humming these. I like how this guy gets his own track. He's not a unique one-off enemy either. The Linga don't get their own music, but their raspy breathing and just the noises they make, they definitely dominate the soundscape when they're nearby. And when they catch you, you're probably never going to hear this though. Let's get to the gameplay mechanics. There's no tutorial sequence in this game, and that's because it doesn't need one. You just get up and start clicking on things. You can play this game entirely with one hand, by the way. Not sure if that's important. Anyway, the puzzles are pretty simple, and this isn't a tricky or difficult game by any stretch. I only had to look up one puzzle for the whole game, and that's because I'm musically dyslexic. For the most part, you just grab an item and go, hey, I wonder if I can use this over there. That makes sense, and they're pretty gratifying too. It also helps that you never have a ridiculous amount of items in your inventory at one time. Speaking of items, the puzzles aren't linear. What I mean is, you can see an item you might need and you can just go and pick it up. You don't have to go through a specific sequence of events and come back later once you know you need it. I'll use this game's first puzzle as an example. So this is my third playthrough. I already know what I need, so I just go grab what I need and then I go and do what I need to do with it. Some other games will make you look at the door, look at the panel, look at the mechanism by which you open the door, before you can go grab the crank. And if you skip any of these steps, your character would just look at the crank and go, "Huh, it's a crank. I wonder what this crank is for. Better leave it alone." It's not a big deal, but I like the peace of mind knowing that I'm not going to have to constantly backtrack looking for something I might have missed. The game will even have a question mark pop up near items or important things in a room, so you won't have to go pixel hunting. Sorry if you like pixel hunting. This is a puzzle game though, so some backtracking is unavoidable, but they keep it interesting. You never feel like the puzzles are being arbitrary or stupid. Alright, this is also a horror game. Well, the monsters are disappointing. They look cool and they're scary at first, but after a while they're more of an inconvenience than anything else. They don't present much of a danger and they kind of just disappear from the game after a while. There are 3 main enemies, and the way to get past them, because Ray has no fighting ability, usually has something to do with holding your breath. Ray can hold her breath for about 13 seconds, and 13 seconds is more than enough time for all of your encounters. You don't even need to be that careful with the timing. Speaking of which, as a kid, did anyone else used to hold their breath and go as fast as they possibly can when they were taking the rubbish out at night time? Or was that just me? Maybe it's because I grew up in Australia. The first enemy you meet is the Lingard. To get past them, you right click to hold your breath as they pass, and then you're on your merry way. The second enemy you come across is the Lantern Spectre. To avoid them, you wait in place, face the opposite direction, and when they lean down to check you out, you hold your breath. Once they're satisfied with your ability to hold your breath, they carry on, and so do you. The third enemy isn't an enemy at all, it's just an infrequent chase sequence. He's pretty cool looking though. So if the enemies are a bit lame and the puzzles are good but not spectacular, then why should you play? Well, this game is all about the story. The story and setting are what hooked me. It's what kept me playing even after the horror was drained out of the game. I wanted to know what was happening, what had happened, and why. The story is mostly told through journal logs and by clicking on things in the environment. It sounds like a lame way to tell a story, but it works pretty well. This is a mystery, and you're looking for clues. There are a few cutscenes and some of the puzzles are related to the story as well. If you don't know a lot about Taiwanese mythology and folklore, then the foreign setting also means you probably won't be able to put together fully what's happening until maybe near the very end. This next part is going to have really mild spoilers. Nothing too bad, but if you don't want any spoilers at all, skip to here. After the intro, you wake up in the assembly hall. Wei is dead and he's been strung up by his ankles. You explore the school, picking up clues and solving puzzles. As you're exploring, you find a lot of Taiwanese references to death. This is what I meant by a foreign setting. Most of these just flew over my head. Now, I'm by no means a smart person, but even if you're a regular megamind, Taiwanese mythology is a niche subject to be an expert on. So I kind of feel like anyone from Taiwan playing this game would have a completely different experience. If you don't get all the specific references, you can at least put enough together to know that something's a little bit off. You also find a bunch of really subtle references to a betrayal of some sort. Now it's time for the big spoilers. If you like what you see so far and you think you're going to play the game yourself, skip to here. Let's go. You put together that Ray is dead and stuck in some kind of a purgatory. She either isn't able to, or she refuses to move on. The latent spectres are spirits from hell whose job is to collect people like Ray. So why is Ray in this position? I mentioned before that the school reminded me a little bit of Springfield Elementary. Well, your main character is like a teenage Lisa Simpson. That's probably stretching the analogy a bit, but whatever. She gets good grades and is a model student going through her senior year. She has ambitions, but she's also a young woman, and it's the 1960s. She doesn't come from a wealthy family, and with Taiwan in the political state it currently is, the possibilities of her leaving are slim to none. She's depressed that she may be fated to just become a subservient housewife like her mum is. Ray's home life sucks too. Her parents are constantly fighting and her dad is a raging alcoholic. Ray's mum finds out that her dad's been having an affair, so she reports him to the authorities for who knows what. It might have been for accepting bribes, but I'm not too sure. He's hauled away and he's never seen again. With all this happening, Ray's grades begin to drop. She's sent to see Mr. Chang, the school counselor, who proceeds to bang her. Yeah, this guy's a piece of shit. The game doesn't explicitly state it, but yeah. They go on dates and she's completely enamored with this guy. It's so gross. Eventually, the counseling sessions are no longer required, and he just kind of dumps her. Ray doesn't take it well, and, well... At some point after this, Ray overhears a conversation between Mr. Chang and Miss Yin. She mistakenly believes that Miss Yin has stolen Mr. Chang from her. Leading up to this, Ray had learned of a secret and highly illegal book club. She learns this from Wei, who is one of its members. It's run by Miss Yin, and Mr. Chang imports the illegal books, although Ray may not know about Mr. Chang's involvement. This is what they were talking about when Ray overheard them. She takes a note from her mother's book and reports them to the authorities in order to get her revenge on Miss Yin. However, Miss Yin is connected, and she's able to flee the country. But the students in the book club are all rounded up and sentenced to decades of hard labor in prison. Mr. Chang is executed. After this, Ray is singled out as a snitch, and she's tormented by the other students at her school. Feeling like she has no other choice, Ray jumps off the school roof. Ever since she died, Ray has been stuck in a cycle. She gathers clues and puts together what happened, and at the end of each cycle, she has to answer 4 questions that prove she has come to terms with what she has done. Ray has to accept her own guilt in spite of her circumstances. If she wants to move on, that is. Towards the end of the cycle you're currently going through, you wake up in the auditorium again. It's different now. The music is gone, and all you can hear are insects, a dog barking here and there, you know, like normal noises. You're back in the real world. It's refreshing, even peaceful. The school is pretty much condemned at this point, but I kinda prefer it this way. Some of the graffiti is pretty neat. You see an old man walking through the school. Turns out that's Wei. Ray has been stuck in this cycle so long that the regime has collapsed and been replaced by another. The new regime granted amnesty to all political prisoners of the White Terror. Seeing Wei seems to change something in Ray. She follows him around the school as a ghost. He doesn't seem angry at her, more just sorrowful of the whole thing. He lost 15 years of his life. This helps Ray to finally accept responsibility for what she has done. This is the good ending. She's allowed to move on or reincarnate or whatever. What religion is she? Taiwan. Taoist / Buddhist. So she gets her soul taken to hell maybe, so it can be cleansed of bad karma and she can reincarnate? Or maybe this is her If you answer the questions wrong and reject responsibility for what's happened, you go back to the auditorium and you hang yourself to a resounding applause, and the cycle repeats again. There is one thing I need to mention that I really don't like about the story, and it's that it romanticizes the relationship between Ray and Mr. Chang. If you answer all the questions correctly, there is one more prerequisite you have to do to get the good ending, and that is you have to pick up this note. Yeah, I really wish they hadn't done this, because besides that, I love the story. This game might not be for everyone. When I first picked it up, it had overwhelmingly positive reviews on Steam. I remember going back to look at the reviews a while back to check how it was going. The reviews had dropped from overwhelmingly positive to very positive. Looking through the negative reviews, they all said similar things along the lines of, so and so said this was the second coming of Christ, but it's not that good. That's why I don't want to oversell this game, because you might just fold your arms and focus on the negatives. There's probably a name for this sort of thing, but I don't know what it is. What I'm saying is, the more a game or anything really gets its praises sung, the harder it makes it to enjoy that piece of media or whatever for what it is, and not what it's been hyped up to be. So if you like the look of it, give it a go, and you might enjoy it, you might not. It definitely straddles the line between game and walking simulator, but I'd say the puzzles that tie into the story help it to stay more on the game side. You can get Detention on Steam, PS4 and the Switch. It's not available on GOG though, I'm not sure why. Overall though, I do recommend this game. There are parts I'm a bit meh on, but nothing I can't stand except for that one thing I mentioned about the story. I just blocked that out though. In spite of my own gripes, I do feel the need to point out this game was made by a crew of only 8 people, and even though I finished my first playthrough in one sitting, I enjoyed every minute of it. I'm off to play their newest game if or when it makes it past the Chinese censorship board.